Okay, anyway, I would like to call upon our next speaker, Sonam Pelden, and she's going to talk about why your startup story matters.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Hi, everyone. How's everyone doing? Hopefully, we are all full and refreshed from lunch now, and I'll try very hard to make sure nobody falls asleep. So the last day and a half have really been very interesting. A lot of learnings for me, especially in terms of like how to start something, how to scale it, and how to really tap into what the customer needs. And in this session, we'll basically be talking and hopefully adding on a few new things to what everybody else has been saying as well. So before we begin, my name is Sonam Pelden, and I am from Bhutan. So 2.5 years ago, I moved to Malaysia to help start Service Hero, and I'll talk more about what Service Hero is and what it does a lot later. But before I begin, I'd like to start off by asking you guys a question. How many of you here genuinely believe that your startup or the product and service that your company is offering is something that the world truly needs? Okay, all right. Now, if that were the case, have any of you ever wondered or thought out loud or said to a friend or a colleague, then why isn't the case that every single person out there is using my product right now? Anyone? Yeah. At least for me, sometimes I feel like no matter how hard I try, it's like the words I use or the things I do just does not seem to resonate with the people who I'm trying to help. It's like I'm standing on one end of the chasm, really yelling out loud, trying to educate and inform the people about the benefits and the features of what my product does, but somehow it's like their old ways of thinking, their unconscious belief system just kicks in, and it swaddles their ears, their hearts, and their brains away from my marketing message. So this is what I really want to dig into today and really discuss with you guys whether or not there is that one underlying factor that really determines why is it the case that people love and adore some brands and they keep going back to it over and over again. Whereas some of us, have to try a little bit harder. We have to spend a lot of money, a lot of resources, and also put in a lot of time. And before we jump into anything, I'd like to make a very clear distinction between story and storytelling. Storytelling is something that we've been hearing a lot. There's a lot of business articles, especially in advertising and marketing, around storytelling. It's a buzzword that you use a lot of the times to really convey what it is that your business stands for, what it does, and how your product works. But I prefer to speak about stories. I feel like whenever storytelling is concerned, you always imply that there is a giver and a taker. It shuts off real communication. Storytelling is old school. It's rather pedantic and transactional as well. But I feel like in order to have modern, effective communication, what you really need to do is you need to be able to have an engagement with the person or the customers that you are talking to. And stories really have that ability to do that. Stories are stories that are powerful tools that you can use to really understand the motivation of what it is that the customer is looking for and what it is that the customer needs. And at the same time, stories are the ones that really bring up that personal connection, consciously or unconsciously, between you and the listener or you and your customer. So storytelling is really the what and the how of your company, whereas stories really encompass the entire existence of your product or your company. It really emphasizes the why. Let's reserve the storytelling for the experts for now, but every single person, everyone in this room, everybody outside, we all have a story to tell. So staying true to the theme of this particular session, I really want to tell, whenever I tell people that I am a marketer, that I'm a marketer in a technology startup, the first question I get is, what do you do? I mean, what is the purpose of your existence, right? You're a startup, you're supposed to be lean, you're supposed to be agile. Where do you have that money to really spend on marketing, or more specifically, a marketer? But I feel like the most straightforward and acceptable answer that I can give anyone is that my job is really to gather the company's customer base. Or at least that's what I've been telling myself for the last 2.5 years, just to feel better about myself. So in the context of how I would measure success in this case is really by the number of absolute customers I acquire at any given time. So in the context of Service Hero, so we are a services marketplace. And what that means is we essentially are a platform that connects users with service providers. So in the context of Service Hero, if I were to talk about success, it would be the absolute number of downloads we get at any one given time. Or it would be the number of transactions we get on a daily, weekly, or monthly basis, and then really calculating the growth over time. And to go about this, what do I actually do? What are the tools that I use, right? So for the sake of all the techies in the audience today, let's just stick to the technology platforms. So Marketing 101 really is about how do we gather those customers, how do we acquire them, how do we make them download, and how do we get them to transact on our platform. So we use a lot of, as you would expect, a lot of Google and Facebook marketing. And those are great tools, especially if you know how to use them effectively. Google, search engine marketing, they really target the low-hanging fruits, the people who have high intention, and then they are the ones that are searching, looking for a cleaner in KL. And they come to us because they find our keywords and our ad campaigns up and ready to service them. Facebook, on the other hand, along with, I guess, social media marketing and content marketing, really gives you the ability to cast this wide net out. This wide net so that it increases your brand awareness. And although people might not want to use your service at that exact time, what it does, it keeps them on top of your mind, or rather it keeps your brand on top of their mind the next time they need to do so, because what it does, it really educates them on what we do and how to find us the next time that they use us. But is that really effective? Adam earlier mentioned about growth, the difference between growth and retention, and which ones would be important. So if I basically just focus on the absolute number of growth, that really defeats the purpose, because what ends up happening is, especially with all these tools that are using, you spend money on them. And ultimately, one day you'll find yourself in this vicious cycle where you're spending money to get people to spend money on you. And it's becoming a zero-sum game. In fact, success, I think, should really be how do you get people to come back and use you once they've tried it. And if I meant anything that I said in the slide before this, I'd say that we need to go and talk to every single customer out there to really understand that what their needs are, to understand what it is that they're looking for, so we'll be able to target and create really customized services for them. And that's going to make them come back to us, because suddenly they're the center of our company's attention, and they'll feel special, they'll feel needed. But in the context of a startup, that's neither pragmatic nor possible. We don't have enough money, enough budget, or resources to be able to do that. So if you talk to any digital marketer, they'll say, oh, we don't need to do that. We already know what the customer wants, right? We like to think we're better than psychologists. After all, we're the ones that are determining exactly what keywords people are going to be using when they're looking for a cleaner or a plumber in KL, or whatever it is that your company is offering. We are the ones that are determining, oh, this shade of yellow is exactly, is a lot better, and it will resonate better with the customer than this particular shade of yellow. Who knows, a lot of us say that we're a data-driven company, so sometimes it could be because it's based out of historical data and learnings. But a lot of the time, we're still not able to really go and tap into the customers and really make them come back and use us over and over again. But there are various other solutions to do this. The first one, I would say, is to make your apps addictive. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're going, of course we would love to build addictive apps, right? Of course, I would love for my customers, whenever they use my product, to elicit the same kind of reactions that when they take a recreational drug. The more important question here, the billion-dollar question, is how do you go about this? How do you go about building addictive apps? And I'll go back to a time when I thought I knew this answer, a time when I was working at a neuropharmacology lab in Brown University. This was at a time when I was convinced that I was going to become a neurosurgeon. Clearly, that didn't happen. But at the time, when I was a student of neuroscience, I was particularly interested in studying human motivation. And human motivation in the context of the neurological compositions that occur in our brain and its related structures when a person is performing a certain task. And I spent over 8 weeks working on this particular experiment where it involved about 200 students, and it really recreated a space which was similar to a casino. So we had a lot of slot machines in the lab, and every single person was told that the objective of this experiment was to win as many tokens as they can, and everyone was given a set number of tokens. Now, before going into this particular experiment, my hypothesis was that the people who will be motivated to keep using the slot machines, or the people who are motivated to keep going and keep continuing the process, would be the ones that make the most winnings, right? After all, if you feel like you're on a lucky streak, you keep working on this. Interestingly enough, what I found was it was neither the people on both sides of the spectrum, meaning the people who are always winning, or the people who were always losing. In fact, it was the ones who were dead smack in the middle, the people who had a variation of wins and losses, that were highly motivated to keep continuing the process. And the way we sort of found this out was by measuring the neurotransmitters in your bloodstream at the time. And some of you will already be familiar with dopamine and serotonin. Those are the neurotransmitters that are associated with the motivational area of our brain, the amygdala, and it produces that the same way that it produces it when you're addicted to something. So say a person proclaims that they're in love, or if they just won a lottery, or somebody who is high on cocaine or methamphetamine, you can be sure that they have a lot of dopamine and serotonin in their brains or in their nervous system. So we found that the people in this experiment that we ran, the ones who were in the middle and had a variation of wins and losses, had the highest level of dopamine and serotonin in their bloodstream. So it really shows that they were the ones that were willing to keep continuing the process. They were addicted to this idea of pulling the slot machines, so that they wanted to know what was going to happen. And to preface this particular experiment, we ran a couple of others as well. And this one in particular included a rat named Fernando, and a box, and a light bulb. And in this particular experiment, what happened was we really wanted Fernando to go and hit the light switch, turn it on as many times as possible. But there was absolutely no way that Fernando would do that if he wasn't motivated, if he wasn't incentivized to do so. So what we did was we, in fact, put a food dispenser to the switch, so that every time Fernando would go in and hit the switch, there'd be a food pellet that came in. And rightfully so, Fernando went into the box, figured out that the switch was connected to the food dispenser, and every time he hit it, he would get a food pellet. But after a couple of times, say about 6 or 7 times when he pressed it, he stopped. He stopped because he did not need to eat anymore. He had satisfied his hunger. And then he just stared blankly at me for a couple of minutes. And there was no way, no nudges, no funny sounds or noises that would incentivize or motivate Fernando to press the light switch anymore. In another session, what we did was we switched it up a little bit. So instead of dispensing one food pellet, every time that he hit the light switch, what we did was we changed the amount of rewards that he got. So, and the types of food that he got as well. So sometimes it'll be a small piece of cheese, other times it'll be a piece of bread. And there were a few times when we didn't even give Fernando anything, regardless of how many times he hit the switch. And pretty soon, we found this huge pile of food at the bottom of the box, because even though Fernando did not need to eat anymore, he was intrigued. He wanted to know what else was going to come out of that food dispenser. So he kept hitting the light switch over and over and over again. And this really highlights this idea of the principle of rewards. And this term was coined sometime in the 1940s by a psychologist at Harvard, and it was called the Skinner experiment. And what Skinner was really trying to tell us was that once human beings satisfy their most basic needs, regardless of how much you incentivize them, regardless of how big the reward is, if you do not include that element of surprise or delight, nobody would want to come and use it again. So this idea here was really that in the context of today's technology applications as well, if you don't vary the amount of rewards that you give people, it didn't matter how big those rewards are, because people eventually get bored. Think of the time when Pokemon Go came about sometime last year. Every single one of us was on it just trying to figure out what was going to happen. But very soon, we realized that, okay, you caught a Pikachu, you caught a Bulbasaur, then what happens? It was the exact same reward system. There was nothing that was changing. And we kept getting the same rewards. So after a while, we got bored of it. And I think along the same vein, you could apply this learning into what a lot of founders go through as well. Now, if I ask any sane founder in this room why they built or started their startup, they'll probably tell me that it was because there was a genuine need for it. Nobody will tell you that when they started that they had a business model or a product in mind. It was because they encountered a problem. And if enough people encounter the same problem, it creates this area of opportunity. And what that does is it, in fact, gives you that ability to acquire users, because everybody wants to be able to solve that particular problem as well. And I genuinely feel that, at least in the context of Service Hero as well, 2.5 years ago when we started, it really was very difficult in Southeast Asia to be able to find a reliable cleaner online, someone who was vetted and trusted by a third party, a place where you could have that sense of reliability because they were insured, or because they held your payments, and then you didn't have to really be worried about whether or not the service was good enough. So I think there was a genuine need when we first came into the market, and that was how I think I can safely say that for the first 100,000 customers we got, it really was that. People needed us, and we were there when they typed in, I want a cleaner or a plumber in KL. But after that, and we were there when they needed us, I really don't think it was because our marketing message was so great. And after that, there were a couple of times when my team and I will be discussing on the various ways that we could possibly increase demand again. And those were the times when, with the cycle of the business, your growth starts to plateau a little bit. So people are always thinking of various ways to increase demand again. And it took a lot of professional restraint to not be like, unless we go around in the middle of the night breaking everyone's pipes, there was really no way that people would come and use our product again. And because we were catering to a specific need. It wasn't anything exciting, it wasn't anything glamorous. People would use us when they actually had a messy house or a broken pipe. And for those of you who have read this book by Nir Eyal, he really talks about this idea of building addictive apps, about building products that create habits in users. And he really touches upon this principle of variation of rewards as well. So in the context of pure digital products, so the Facebooks and the Instagram, Snapchats, and the Tinder of our days, they're the ones where the entire user experience happens online. Nobody has to go off the platform, no cleaner or transaction has to come to your house, so everything is done on the technology platform itself. And in the context of these popular apps that we've always been using, what it does, it really taps into an innate human need, the need to be accepted, to be admired, that need for validation, and that need for social connection. And all of these apps really, really trigger a target into those specific psychological aspects. But the way that the variation of rewards works here is that you really don't know what to expect every time you log onto the app. You don't know if somebody has liked your photo. You don't know if somebody has matched with you. You don't know if somebody has left a funny comment, right? And that's why we keep going back. We keep hitting that red button. We keep scrolling down. We keep swiping right. We want to make sure that, every time we come, our brains are greedy. They want to know what sort of rewards that they get. Now let's park this thought here for a second. In our quest to really understand how to communicate with the customer without really going and speaking to every single one of them, I think there's another way to go about this as well. And this learning comes from the time when I was working at The Economist. And this was the time when I was convinced I would be the editor-in-chief at The Economist. Clearly, that didn't happen either. So it was sometime in 2012, 2013, when this hype around thought leadership was really picking up. Every single business publication wanted to be the thought leader of thought leadership. And for those of you who are not very familiar with the term, it really just means, being the first provider of news, being the first informant, being the first one to educate people on a variety of different subjects. Now, you would assume, as most people do, that whenever you write an article, you cater it to a specific group of people because it sticks to your value proposition. And The Economist is no different. They're known to target a very specific reader base. The academics, the professors, the people who are working on Wall Street, those are the kinds of people who would usually be reading The Economist. And they really wanted to break out of that notion. So when I was working there, I was working with the content marketing team on really building a strategy around appealing to various different segments of readers. And unlike the way that things were divided before, where the editorial team would be divided by subject matter, so you had the people who worked on finance, the ones who worked on politics, and the ones who worked on business. Instead of that, they segmented it based on the readership. So there was a working backward kind of method that was going on. And what that really did was, instead of focusing on the demographic of who your readers are, they changed the mentality to really look into the psychographic of your readers. So just to give you an example, so for instance, if we were writing on fiscal policy, they would divide the editorial team in such a way that we had a group of people who would cater and write for people who had studied and worked on fiscal policy for half of their lives, the academics and the professors, what have you. And then on the other side of the spectrum, you would have my grandmother, who has never heard about the term fiscal policy, and you were asked to write with her in mind and really explain what it is that fiscal policy means. And the idea here that was drilled into our minds when we were working on this was really not to focus on the what and the how of fiscal theory and fiscal policy. It was really to get to the user to understand why did it matter and how did it affect their day-to-day lives. You did not have to explain it in the terms of what you would usually expect in terms of economics and finance. It really was digging down into how will we be able to simplify it in such a way that this particular user understands it. So we were told to write for habits, to make sure that it really applies and aligns with everyone. And if you talk to a lot of people here again, and I know this has been reiterated a couple of times today and yesterday, about how founders have the tendency to say, I'm in the business to disrupt this, or I'm in the business to revolutionize that. Maybe it's time for us to take a step back and talk about how we can align with how people and customers that we want to target are actually doing things, and then figure out a way to really revolve around their lives. So this idea of writing for habits, perhaps we could also design for them. Because just as we are so engrossed in our own origin story of why we started a company, the user also only cares about how he or she can get the job done. They don't really care that you have this team of great engineers that are working behind it. They don't care that you were the one who stumbled upon this epiphany when you couldn't find the job yourself some 2-3 years ago. Because what happens at the end of the day is your customer perception really drives what your brand stands for. The brand is ultimately in the eye of your customer. And it really, what it does, it puts it to, you need to be able to take a step back and think, maybe it's time I look into maybe it's time I look into how I can actually revolve around the customer's journey instead of anticipating them to come to me. And some brands do an amazing job at this. I'm sure you'll already guess. One of them is Apple. Now, in the most recent product launch event, I wasn't intrigued so much by the iPhone X or the iPhone 8. In fact, it was the Apple Watch that captivated my attention. And more specifically, the 3-minute commercial that preceded it. Because in those 3 minutes, what they really did was they took all these seemingly normal people, they took and explained a story about how they go about their normal lives, and they had this one device that had the ability to work around their schedules and also enhance that experience. So you had this old lady in this old house, in this old home, and this blind man going about his day in Shanghai. You had this little girl who was diagnosed with diabetes, and also this athlete who was training for a major triathlon. And all of their stories were really simple. They were very powerful. Nowhere in that commercial did anybody mention the features, the benefits, or the materials that went into the making of the Apple Watch. And just to continue with the conversation of how to really dive into what the customers' needs and wants are, what we need to be able to do is really bring them all back together to hone it back home. So we talked about how we could do it by building addictive apps. And we could also do this by speaking the customer's language, really simplifying the language so that it revolves around their world. But at the end of the day, you need something else. You need something to really tip the customer off the edge of the cliff so that they come and use you, or so that you're on top of their mind when they need to use something. And there's a lot of research that's been done on this at Stanford University, and that's been led by Professor B.J. Fogg, and he's doing a lot of work around behavior design. And what he's essentially saying is how marketers now use notifications. They're a great way for you to really capture the person's attention when they're least expecting it. So we, as marketers, have the tendency to say, I've read this HubSpot article, and it says that 2 p.m. on a Tuesday is when people want to read our emails the most. That's the time when the open rate is the highest, or the click-through rate is the highest. But what he's arguing here is that element of surprise, especially when people have forgotten about you for a very long time, is very, very powerful. And these comes in the way of notifications. The notifications that tell you, we've missed you, you haven't logged into our app for the last 24 hours. Or the emails that tell you, get 50% off on your next purchase. Those are all very powerful tools, because at the end of the day, frustration is a lot more flexible than annoyance. And brands are getting a lot better at making this art very, very subtle. Instead of just, bam, right in their face telling, get 50% off, get 30% off, what they're doing is they're using other means to cause this stickiness. And animations are a great way to do this as well, because what this does, it really captures the user's attention. And when something is loading, if you have the logo animated, the user is less likely to shut it off, because they get captivated by this little element of surprise. Of course, it works to make the user interface a lot better, but at the end of the day, if you really are talking about retention, this using very subtle ways to get the user's attention. And that's how content marketing came into place in the first place anyway, because you're really talking about selling about a brand or talking about what your product does without hard selling. And But at the end of the day, it seems like whenever we want to motivate someone to do something, our first instinct is to persuade them. What if we instead look into it by making behavior easier and making sure that people get addicted to a particular product or a particular service? I'm sure a lot of you will be familiar with this screen. At the end of every episode at Netflix, what happens? They automatically start reeling or playing the next episode, right? And Netflix does a great job at really understanding human psychology here. What happens is my motivation is super high at this point because I want to know exactly what happens in the next episode. The previous one kept me hooked, right? And at the same time, the behavior or the level of difficulty to go and watch the next episode is 0. In fact, it's less than 0 because it's harder for me to actually pause this rather than to go and continue watching. So what this does, it really makes the customer feel like your brand or your product is speaking to them. These are the internal triggers that companies use to keep you from logging off, keep you from signing off, or from unsubscribing. Think about it. If you are a politician who's really trying to get people to vote for you, you have a higher chance to get people's vote by sending a bus to pick them up and get them and gather them to go to the voting houses on the day of the election, rather than making elaborate speeches online on the day of. So, and even if you're a bank and if you're advertising for a current account that your service is introducing, instead of putting up a big billboard in the middle of the highway, but maybe try reducing the number of clicks it takes to actually open one. So this is what they're really tapping into, making it feel like you understand what it is that the customer wants, making them feel like they have superpowers, because that is very, very powerful. Think of me, for instance. I don't drive or own a car in KL. I Grab or Uber everywhere. And I cannot imagine, and I don't even want to think of the alternatives here, because number one, I'm a really bad driver, and number two, I feel like that entire experience of getting into the Grab and then getting out without talking or exchanging cash with the driver is a magical experience. That feeling of paying without actually exchanging cash actually goes into what you're already used to. It revolves around what I actually need to do already. And I feel like that's why the next big revolution, especially in terms of e-wallets and payment systems that are coming into place, the ones that really tap into what users are already doing, like you need to go have your afternoon coffee, you need to go have your lunch with your colleagues. If you can somehow make that experience a lot easier, people will be more inclined to come and use you. But humans are a fickle sort at the end of the day. Regardless of how many tricks we use, we hate being sold to, but we love to buy. It's like I'm walking down a street and then I see somebody approaching me with flyers and pamphlets. I'm running the other way around because I hate that idea of being a sellout. Even when I see my own reflection, sometimes when the next episode of Netflix is loading, I feel like it's my soul looking back at me and judging me for actually buying into all these schemes that these companies are using to manipulate me. And that's because we as humans, we always look for an alternative. We look for a different reason to purchase something, to really, because we don't want to feel like we're being used or we're being a sellout here. And there are 3 ways really that I feel you can go about and use this to your strength, because at the end of the day, every single product or every single service, every single company is a lot more than the product or the services they sell. Now, and you can tap into this, number one, by your competitive advantage. Take Zappos, for instance. Although they started as an e-commerce site that really wanted to give a whole variety of shoes every time somebody wanted to buy it, they really pioneered the excellence in customer service. And they're using that as a strength now when they reach out to customers. There's also the social pressure. It was touched upon slightly in the earlier session about how brands have the ability to create social pressure and stickiness. If every one of my friends is on Snapchat instead of Instagram and Facebook, I'm more likely to go there as well because I want to know exactly what it is that they're doing. And then the third one is to really stand for something else apart from what your brand is actually doing. And it can be something completely different. Think of Starbucks. Really, when you go there, it is a neutral place. It stands for the third place where you can go, not to have great coffee, but perhaps to have a business conversation, perhaps to make connections with other people who are coming there as well. And brands really, at the end of the day, succeed when they're able to build in this internal positive connection between something else and their product. When I'm uncertain, I Google. When I'm lonely, I go on Facebook. When I'm bored, I go on YouTube. And all these brands, they did not start on day one by saying, this is exactly what we stand for. It took several years, several user stories, several communications, and really understanding what each of the customers were using their products for to really determine and define what it was that these brands actually stood for. And that gives us the opportunity here to really take a step back again and then think of why was it that we started to build our product or our startup in the first place anyway? What did our first 5 customers, first 10 customers really tell us when they used us? And really dig deeper into their core because we can stand for something that's a lot bigger than what it is that we actually offer. Because at the end of the day, people don't buy what we do. They buy why we do it. And then in the context of Apple, I feel like although it is a great, it makes great products that are simple to use, what it does at the end of the day is really associate this idea of thinking differently, from standing out from your peers, and that's what people are really buying into. Another brand that does this amazingly is Tesla. Every single person I know wants to own and work for Tesla. They call it the cause. They don't even call it a company. And Tesla, because Tesla in its sense is not just selling a car. It's selling a brand. It's selling you an identity. When you own a Tesla, you're saying you have green bragging rights. You're saying that I'm here to make sure that my grandchildren live in this sustainable society where and a place where we wean off our addiction to fossil fuels. And that is a very powerful message at the end of the day, when you're able to stand for something a lot bigger than what it is that you actually produce. So just as a way to wrap everything up, I guess what I really want to say in this context is, as a marketer, it is very, very easy to get fumbled in the unit economics game. And of course, data and empirical analysis, they're all very, very important. But at the end of the day, we really need to listen to what our customers are actually talking about, what they really, really need. So the next time, I guess, somebody asks me, what is the point of being a marketer in a startup? What is it that you actually do? I guess I'll try to tell them that I'm in this mission to try and create valuable and impactful stories. Thank you, guys.
That was a great presentation by Sonam. Okay, guys,
Happy
Q&A
to take
session.
questions, yes.
Q&A session from the floor. Any question? Mike, please.
Hello, my name is Iqbal Rafi from Pelden Global Consulting. So my question to you is that, a lot of marketers don't really know anything about science, but you incorporate science and marketing. So my question to you is that, what are the books that we should refer to when it comes to combining science and marketing that you would like to recommend to us? Thank you.
Okay, the question is, how do we combine science and marketing? The point I was trying to make with emphasizing or highlighting that point in my life where I was a student of neuroscience really wasn't to say that you need a science background or you need a journalism background to be able to do to be able to understand what your customer wants, but it was a way to just showcase really that innate need for motivation and how people go about it when they're looking for something other than just buying the product. I honestly don't think that there needs to be a specific connection between science and marketing. In fact, if you have the basis of really data analytics, about statistical analysis, what Adam touched upon in his session as well, about really speaking to the user, reiterating what you're doing, and testing as many times as possible, those are science as well in its own ways, not just in the terms that we're used to defining it.
Thank you, Sonam. Any more questions?
Yep. What's the story of my startup? Okay. So when Service Hero started, obviously, there was a need. There was a specific need for why we needed to bring this, the marketplace, services marketplace that connected users with service providers. But if, at the end of the day, like I was saying, it's a very tricky industry to be in because you're servicing people's basic needs. It's not something like a gaming company or fashion where a lot of people with high spending power will come and use you. People will book a cleaner or a plumber when they actually need it, not just because they feel like it. So I think the one that we've tried to stick to in the last couple of months is really being a technology platform that empowers local service providers to be that connection, to really increase and improve efficiency within the service marketplace.
Thank you.
Hope that answers your question. You look kind of puzzled still. Sorry?
Of people buy why you do, not what you do.
Yes.
So for your example, it's
Yeah,
so
exactly.
far
So the what you do in the context of us is really making sure that users get the service providers when they need them. The why is maybe zooming out from that entire structure and saying that we're in it to really help improve efficiency in the service marketplace. Make sure that you get your things done in a more simpler, easier way.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yep. There's a question here.
It's okay.
In today's business, there are more and more brands that use the personal brand owner's story as one of the stickiness factor to the business. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on how critical this is for probably future growth of business, and how should a brand decide not to pursue it that way, to not highlight the persona of the owner.
I see.
What are the ways that they can do to make sure that they can compete?
I think this was highlighted in a fireside session yesterday about really that difference about associating the brand identity versus the founder's identity. I personally don't think that there is any need to segregate those two, because a lot of the times when you're working in this context of a startup, you are essentially spending 24/7 or a lot of your time basically building that idea, and you're the one that's the key salesman for your particular brand. So I personally don't think that there's anything wrong with it. It's just a matter of knowing exactly when to make the distinction, especially if you own a lot of different portfolios. But some people know exactly how to do it because they stand for something that's a lot bigger and they work on several different products. Elon Musk, for example, is a great example for that, because he stands ultimately for sustainability, for really pushing the boundaries in science and technology and sustainability. And he has all these different companies that all aspire to that same goal, but they do various different things. They have the what and the how in this context is different, but the why at the end of the day remains that common ground of commonality that strings all of them together.
Thank you. Okay. I got you.
Hi, I'm just curious to hear a little bit more about Service Hero. In terms of your repeat purchases, right? How do you get your customers to keep on booking through your app as opposed to just like directly booking with the person that they work with?
Yeah. No, that's a great question, because it's something that we talk about, something that's perplexed us a lot in the last couple of months, or rather since day one when we started, because it's rather simple, or I think, at least from my own experience, to get customers to come and try your brand for the first time. And it really drills back to this notion of having various rewards at the end of the day, because when you're a company that really services basic needs, it doesn't matter if you go and give them an like 5-star service. Doesn't matter if you had stellar service providers that made sure that all your needs were satisfied. At the end of the day, if they don't need you, they don't come back to you. So the various tools that we've been experimenting with is really a loyalty scheme, something very similar to what Grab is doing, having a point-based system so that every time somebody uses it, they get incentivized to use it again, because they'll either get another discount or some other gift and promo that's bundled into that. But yes, it's one of our major problems that we're trying to solve, and there are various other ways to do that as well, I think. Like number one, when we introduce online payments, and also that aspect of really associated or aligning insurance and security whenever a service provider signed up, those help as well, because there's that mind shift where at least there's a third-party provider that will come and be able to rescue you in case something goes wrong when the job is getting done.
Last 2 questions. Anyone? Oh, okay.
Great presentation.
Oh,
I would
you.
like to find out what are the differences in terms of the marketing strategy used for digital and non-digital product. Thank you.
What are the strategies? So, because we're primarily a technology platform and we want to make sure that people come and use our app and don't go away from it, we stick more and focus a lot heavily on digital marketing. Digital marketing in the context, like I mentioned, Google, Facebook, a lot of social media marketing, a lot of content marketing. I feel like in the beginning, when you have a lower budget or when you want to reach out to a wider audience, then offline marketing and really going out there, talking to a lot of people, attending events, those things really help as well. But for us, if I had to really make a distinction on the amount of focus we give on those two, it'll probably be like 20% on offline and the rest all focused entirely online.
Okay, thank you. One more last.
Hello. How do you stand out from other similar startups like Cowdim or Recommend? Because when I googled Service Hero, Recommend came out first, and then Cowdim, and then Service Hero. So how do you differentiate from other startups, and how do you battle the Google ads? Like, they're on top of you guys.
Right.
Yeah.
Very good question. Again, something that keeps us up at night, just trying to think about how do we differentiate ourselves. It's really about the three key elements that I talked to, about really focusing on what your competitive advantage is, what is your edge, and you figure that out very, very quickly when you start something. So in the context of Service Hero, I guess we can't really say that, the way that our business model works is entirely different from Cowdim or Recommend, at least like in the early days. What we did was eventually we tried to cater to a more targeted and specific user base, meaning we wanted to really drill down on the categories that we were popular in. So perhaps Cowdim and Recommend are great at electrical and handyman and other service-specific jobs. But for Service Hero in particular, we were getting a chunk of our jobs from cleaning and AC servicing. So we really try to focus on that by building building
niche,
good
right?
relationships with our service providers and really being able to drill down on that. So that was the first one, just basically focusing more on the types of the categories that we were popular in, and then really putting a lot of energy on that. The second way, I guess, would be coming up with various different add-ons, various different things, features that would get customers to use us a lot better. So we have a direct service now where you can basically go and instead of waiting for service providers to get back to you with a specific quote, what we do is we have standard prices, and you just pick where and when you need it, and then they automatically connect with them. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Sonam. I think that's all for now. Anyway, round of applause again for Sonam Pelden, guys.